It's officially October, which means the year is starting to wind down, leaves are falling, pumpkin spice has consumed our society once again, and Halloween is finally almost here. And with it finally being October, that means that we are now just weeks away from the Five Nights at Freddy's movie finally being released. After years and years of production, Five Nights at Freddy's fans from around the world will finally get to see the pizzeria come to life. Since the first game's release in August of 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's has become a cultural phenomenon with tons of toys, books, food products, and a massive fan base that has been clamoring to see the franchise on the big screen. And so today, to kick off October and get ready for the upcoming film, we're going to be looking at the versions of the film that have been scrapped over the last 8 years. The FNAF movie was first announced in April 2015, just 8 months after the release of the first game. At the time, Warner Brothers had acquired the rights, with Roy Lee, David Katzenberg, and Seth Grahame-Smith set to produce the adaptation. Seth Grahame-Smith had said at the time that they were working with FNAF creator Scott Cawthon to make an insane, terrifying, and weirdly adorable movie. In July of that year, Gil Kenan was set to direct, with a screenplay being co-written by Tyler Burton Smith. However, whatever this Warner Brothers version was going to be ended up scrapped. There have been rumors over the years that Warner Brothers' 2019 Banana Splits movie was made using an abandoned FNAF script, but these claims have never been found to be true. But it's very likely that the games served as light inspiration for the film, if nothing else. In March of 2017, it was announced that Blumhouse Productions would be producing the film instead of Warner Brothers. By February of 2018, Chris Columbus was announced to be directing the film instead of Gil Kenan. In August of that year, Cawthon revealed that the first draft of the film's script, which he wrote with the co-author of the Five Nights at Freddy's novel trilogy, Kira Breed Risley, had been completed, and that it would involve the events of the first game. But by November, Cawthon announced that he had scrapped the script, which Jason Blum and Chris Columbus liked, because he had an idea that he liked better. This would cause a significant delay to the film. By September of 2021, Chris Columbus was no longer directing the film, with Emma Tammy announced to be directing the film in October of 2022. In November of 2020, Scott Cawthon took to Reddit to announce what he claimed was bad news about the film. But before he said what this news was, he posted a list of scrapped screenplays the film had had over the years, and went into a bit of detail about each one and why they were scrapped. So let's take a look at these, and I'll give my thoughts on each one. The F screenplay. Basic setup. Group of teenage troublemakers break into Freddy's. Chaos ensues. Problems. Although a pretty basic setup, there were a lot of odd choices here, which only got weirder as the story continued. The story ended with our protagonist in a secret underground animatronic factory that was designing robots for the government. Verdict. WTF. Strayed way too far from source material. Tossed. I'm not too sure about this one. I like the general idea of some teens breaking into Freddy's, but the idea of the animatronics being made for the government? Like Scott said, it gets too far away from the source material, and it sounds like this one was written by someone who only had a passing knowledge of the franchise. This next one might be my favorite because it leaves so much to the imagination. The Plushies Take Manhattan screenplay. Basic setup. Plushies take Manhattan. Problems. Plushies took Manhattan. Verdict. Burned with fire. I don't even know where to begin with this one. It tells you everything but nothing at the exact same time. I love it. I'm picturing a Gremlins-esque scenario here where a child gets a Freddy Fazbear plushie for Christmas or their birthday or some other holiday, and it just comes to life and starts wreaking havoc to the point where New York is just eventually just overrun by various plushies, from Chica to random animatronic plushies like 4th of July Freddy. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, and I honestly think it would have been a lot of fun. The Random Charlie screenplay. Basic setup. Charlie and friends sneak into Freddy's after hours to retrieve a lost toy. Problems. Although sharing names of familiar characters from the series, these characters had nothing to do with their game and book counterparts. So while featuring familiar elements of the games, it seemed too loosely based on the game and lost a lot of its impact because of it. Verdict. Felt like a random bag of FNAF elements with no real stakes. Meh. Not so sure about this one. The idea of sneaking into Freddy's to retrieve a toy doesn't seem like there's much there story-wise, and giving characters the same names as important characters in the franchise, but not making them those characters is one of the laziest things you can do when adapting a story for the big screen. Probably a good thing that we didn't get this one. The Silver Eyes screenplays. Basic setup. Kira and I both worked on 3 versions of a Silver Eyes screenplay over the course of about a year, trying to find the right approach to the story from the first book. Problems. These were the first attempts I made myself to write a screenplay after realizing it was going to be difficult to find someone else who understood the lore well enough to do it. Unfortunately, it also meant that these screenplays suffered greatly from my inexperience at writing. Even Kira, with her writing expertise, couldn't save them. Verdict. Although these had some good elements, I ultimately decided to focus on making a screenplay from the games and not from the books. This is most likely the script that Scott scrapped back in 2018. And while basing the movie on the books might have seemed like a good idea at the time, I think that basing it on the games is the better choice. It also makes sense that Scott's first few cracks at writing the script himself weren't perfect and that he progressively got better over time. This version could have been interesting, but I'm kind of glad that it was scrapped in the end. The Pawn Shop screenplay. Basic setup. A kid who watches after a pawn shop finds trouble when an animatronic is brought in. It turns out that Freddy's has been robbed, and the animatronics were taken to different locations for sale. The other animatronics come to retrieve the one at the pawn shop, and the kid and his friends get roped into adventure. Problems. A creative approach, but felt a little too much like A Boy and His Animatronic. Too much after-school adventure, not enough horror. Verdict. Seemed like a good idea at the time. This setup sounds like something out of the 1980s, which isn't a bad thing. The Boy and His Animatronic angle could have worked, but straying too far away from the horror aspect of the franchise probably isn't the best idea. The Cassidy screenplay. Basic setup. Diving deep, this screenplay packed in a lot of lore following the story of Cassidy. Problems. Spanning multiple time periods, following multiple characters, and featuring lore from multiple games, this was pretty saturated to a fault. It may have been satisfying to the most hardcore fans, but it would have left the majority of people confused and lost. Hey, wait, maybe this was the most accurate screenplay. Verdict. Ultimately more of a visual encyclopedia than a movie. This just wasn't satisfying even to me. Out. The biggest issue when making a Five Nights at Freddy's movie is, with so much lore and plot elements, what do you focus on? What do you leave out? Focusing on Cassidy, the child who would eventually come to possess Golden Freddy, makes sense, but as Scott said, it read more like an encyclopedia. Could have been really cool, but it definitely sounds like it would have been a bit too much. The Misfit Kid screenplay. Basic setup. Single mom brings her kid to a new town. Kid finds Freddy's. Hilarity ensues. Problems. One of the problems in creating a modern-day story with an old Freddy's setting is finding a way to connect the protagonist to the restaurant, finding a reason for them to be there, and finding a reason for them to stay. The problem here is that the reason for this kid to go to Freddy's and have misadventures was too contrived and too forced. Verdict. Not a bad setup, but it just didn't work. If I don't care about the characters, then there's a good chance no one else will either. Pass. This was going to be the screenplay for a while because it didn't have any serious flaws. I ultimately just decided it wasn't good enough though. This one is interesting to me because it really could have worked. The Misfit Kid in a New Town plot is one of the oldest in the book, and I feel that pairing that story beat with Freddy's could make for something special. This is the one script that I'd really want to read. The Ghost Tracker screenplay. Basic setup. A group of amateur ghost trackers sneak into the abandoned Freddy's. Problems. Although a very common sense setup for this sort of movie, the problem again arose about how to give these characters a connection to Freddy's itself. What ended up happening was too much of the story went to their own backstories and their own hardships, and it took the spotlight away from the story of Freddy's. Verdict. A stronger connection between protagonist and Freddy's was needed. Lesson learned. Creating original characters for a film that's based on an already existing story or property is one of the easiest ways for problems to arise during production. If not done carefully, the film will end up more about them than the actual focus. If also not done carefully, then we'll end up with very thinly written characters that could exist in any other movie. So while the idea of ghost hunters coming to Freddy's is a good idea, I totally get why this one was scrapped. The insane screenplay. Basic setup. Another Ghost Tracker variation, this one involved the Funtime animatronics, underground ball pit tunnels, and a marionette out for revenge. Problems. As some other screenplays ventured too far into adventure, this one went too far into action. Verdict. Too all over the place with too many characters doing too many things. Turning FNAF into an all-out action film sounds odd, but it could have worked. But with it being a variation of the Ghost Hunter idea, I wonder if the character issues that stemmed from that screenplay also plagued this one. The Mike screenplay. Basic setup. This makes sense. Why didn't I think of this before? Problems. Actually, this is a good mix. It has the best pieces from all the previous screenplays. Not really any problems here. All the right characters, all the right motivations, all the right stakes. Verdict. Yeah, we're going with this one. It's fun, it's scary, and it has a great central story. Focusing on Mike as our central protagonist and giving us more of an insight at his backstory and what exactly brings him to working at Freddy's is probably the best possible route the movie could have taken. And everything we've seen so far from it looks great. Scott followed up this part of the post by stating that the bad news was that there would be no more additions to the list because the Mike screenplay is what they were focusing on. He then said that filming would start in spring of 2021, although filming would later be delayed until early 2023. As you can see, we've come a long way in the 8 years since the FNAF movie was first announced, and I personally can't wait to see the film on the big screen at the end of this month. What do you guys think? Do any of these scrap plot lines stand out to you? Which one would you have liked to see? Let me know in the comments down below. Hey everyone, Seeker here, and happy October. This video is kicking off a full month of Halloween-centered content, and I can't wait to show you all what I've been working on. I'll see you all in the next video, and as always, please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe.